Um, Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is CSR Talent Group's Insider Insights webinar series. This is the fifth in our series. We've done webinars on materiality assessment, ESG strategy, climate disclosure, and governance. And you can find all of those webinars, those recorded webinars, on our website under the tab called Learn. We also have summaries for people who don't have enough time to listen to the whole webinar. So hopefully those are helpful. We've really developed this series because we want those of you who are working in companies to be able to walk away with some practical ideas and insights that can help you move your goals forward. So we are hopeful that today you will walk away with some really good information and some insights. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to go through a couple things. One of the concepts behind this webinar series is that we have a network of over 175 experts like Tessa and Ben in our network, and we want people to understand that there's a really good depth of experience and knowledge that's not typical of a regular consulting firm, so that any sort of insight or issue that you'd like discussed, we have somebody in our network who can do that. So we're going to keep building these webinars and also doing expert interviews that we're going to post on our website that give you some insight into individuals' background and experience that might be of interest for you or your company. Our next webinar, just so you know, is coming up on July 18th, Tuesday at 12 o'clock Eastern. And it's titled CSR and ESG in the Fashion Industry, Past, Present, and Future. We think that'll be a fascinating webinar, and that's a good example of some real interesting expertise in the fashion industry, fashion and clothing industry. So our goal really as a company, CSR Talent Group, started a couple of years ago to help companies find the perfect talent, the expert that they need to get their work done. And unlike a regular consulting firm, we can find almost anybody that you need for short-term or long-term help for typical consulting projects, or for some of our clients, and Tessa is a fractional consultant for one of our clients, for some temporary positions for part-time or long-term projects. So we are here to help you get the talent that you need to move your goal forward. So let me take a moment now to introduce our speakers. Tessa Edwards is the founder of and principal consultant at Tessa J. Edwards Consulting Group, which supports companies to propel their social impact forward. For over 15 years, Tessa has worked with companies such as Charles Schwab, Google, Comcast, and PG&E to engage their employees, launch new programs, amplify community leaders, nurture nonprofit partnerships, and manage special events. Ben Sampson is the co-founder and CEO of WeHero, a company focused on building innovative solutions that empower organizations and individuals around the world to maximize social impact. Over the past 4 years, he's worked with hundreds of Fortune 1000 companies on their CSR strategies, with a specific focus on how to maximize employee engagement through high-impact, scalable volunteer programming. So before we get started, let me just go through a few housekeeping items. As I mentioned, we'd love it if you want to submit any questions through the Q&A. We have a number of questions for the panelists that we've developed before the webinar, but we'd love to have your additional questions. And as I mentioned earlier, we're recording this session. For those of you who can't stay for the whole webinar, we hope you can, but we will record it in case you want to look at it later, or if you have colleagues that may be interested in listening. So let's get started. Tessa and Ben are going to present a number of slides. I think Ben's going to start us off, and that should take us anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. Then we'll leave time at the end for Q&A, and we may have a few questions along the way. So Ben, do you want to start us off?
Sure thing, Tom. Thanks a lot for having us here and introducing us. And Tessa and I always joke that we get to have a lot of these conversations just casually. And so really fun that we get to have a casual conversation like this with all of you. And so very excited to be here and very excited to get to do this with Tessa too as well.
Right.
And so, we can kind of kick off, and Tessa, I can, you talk about some of these metrics, and then feel free to jump in and discuss them as well. But maybe just to kick off with some numbers, because we love data. Two metrics: 77% of employees say company-sponsored volunteer opportunities are essential to employee well-being. Then 72% of millennial job seekers consider a company's social commitment before accepting a job offer. We meet with companies all the time where 2 out of 3 of their job candidates that they're interviewing are asking the recruiters in the company, what are their engagement and social impact efforts like at the company? What are they doing around volunteering? And so it continues to be just this growing area. I think, volunteering and engagement's a really interesting thing to talk about now. Obviously, we're going to be talking a lot about the future of what this looks like, and where companies are finding success. But I think, as we look at 2008, we saw a massive bump in volunteer and engagement numbers during that recession. And we are seeing the same right now as we look at that data. And so, Tess, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add here on this slide before we kind of jump into the meat of the presentation.
Thanks, Ben, and welcome everyone. It's great to be here. I think these data points really point to the fact that community work and employee engagement are key to business success. I mean, these are reaching the community work that we do, the way that employees feel engaged and connected to the company really drives talent attraction. It drives employee retention, promotes well-being. It even, affects profit margin of companies. So I think more than ever, the research is really showing this. And there is one more stat I wanted to add to this, that 80% of workers agree that it's important for a company to work for a company whose values and culture align with their own. So I think that is just another underscore of people are selecting companies that have community work and are showing up in the community in the way that matches with their values. And one other thing is that ACCP, so the Association for Corporate Citizenship Professionals, just came out with an updated version of their, I think it's called Making the Case document, which is about how to show to your leadership that this work is valuable and employee engagement, community partnerships are valuable. And it has a ton of stats in it like this. So if you want to check that out, it's also great just as an overall resource, but that just came out, I think, last week.
Great.
Yeah. And we could talk a little bit about approaching employee engagement. I know, thank you for folks that responded to the Q&A. There's people that are maybe launching their first social impact or engagement program at a company, and some people that have a lot of experience doing this. But when we think about approaching employee engagement, there's a number of models where companies can find a lot of success in doing this, and key things to think about. And Tessa, you and I can kind of go back and forth on what some of the key points are. We don't have to go through bullet for bullet, how this works. But I think, what we spend a lot of time thinking about at We Hero is how do these programs scale, especially for larger organizations. I think it's really easy if you're a small company, you're getting into this. And if you're the only person trying to build engagement within the company, it's really quite easy. It gets really challenging if you're a 1 or 2 person CSR or ESG team with 10,000 employees. That's where it becomes really challenging. And one of the things we'll talk about is how to build a program that scales through ambassadors, through employee activation, how to actually get employees excited about volunteering and engaging within the company. And ultimately how to have those ambassadors and different teams throughout the company continue to keep creating volunteer opportunities across the company. But employees really want this, to Tessa's point, to the data that we've been looking at. We can talk a lot about how to connect with employee resource groups and how to work with teams and D&I teams to really meet employees where they're at and expand reach. And I think one of the things we'll also talk about today is that engaging employees right now, there's a lot of employees that want to do this, but it's also a huge challenge. I think we see this battle of, we know employees want this, but we're struggling to get engagement. How do we do that? And how do we compete for the greatest resource, which is time, and actually get people to take the time out of their day to participate in these programs? And we'll talk about formats that are doing that really successfully, and where companies are finding success in that. Tessa, you want to jump in and talk a little bit about some of the approach here?
Yeah, I think For those of you who may just be starting out, or it's, it's a good reminder for us always, even those of us who've been in the field for a long time, is aligning our work with company values. The first bullet here, I really feel like is core to getting buy-in and engagement. And so if you are just starting out, or you're the one person CSR team and you're coming up with a new strategy, for example, I think thinking about the company values, also taking the environment, the current environment into consideration as you're doing that. And then if you've been, managing these programs for a long time, or, you're at a company that has really sophisticated models, I think as we're launching new programs and as we're thinking about piloting something new or adapting something, just keeping this in mind, keeping the values in mind as the North Star, I would say. And then another one I think that is really big is the company culture and the structure, especially post-pandemic, where people are working from is a big factor in how they want to and how they can engage. So whether it's in person at a nonprofit or virtual or hybrid, and office events might all make sense. And a lot of it really depends on where people are, because we need to meet people where they're at.
Yeah, we're already getting a question about remote, how you engage people remotely. So I'm sure you'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
We will. And if it's still the question at the end, we will make sure to cover that directly. But yeah, it's a great question. And I think everyone is working on figuring that out still, but we will share some ideas for sure. Thanks, Tom. Ben, I think the one last thing I wanted to share on this slide is the grounding our work in a community-centric model, which is the fourth bullet down here. I feel like, so this is working with nonprofit partners as partners, and working with employees and asking their opinion and engaging them in some level of choice, in terms of asking their opinion on a new program, or having a giving program where they can select where they want to give funds to. All of those things build engagement. And I think particularly with nonprofit partners, I feel like this can sometimes be overlooked, or, well, not necessarily overlooked, but we can lose sight of that if we're really focused internally on, for example, hitting X% of employees to volunteer, or this number of hours. And what we really need to also keep in mind through all of that is how are we partnering with the community? Are we moving the needle on issues? Are we contributing to the social movement of the cause that we are working on? And I think it's really, we partner with nonprofit partners because they have earned the trust of their communities already, and they can do things that we can't do as companies. And so keeping that also at the core, I feel like really it's the right thing to do, but it also encourages employees to engage, and they also feel that authenticity and feel that their work and their time it really has meaning, and in spending their time on this work.
Mm-hmm. We often compare it to, like, there's volunteering to a nonprofit and volunteering with a nonprofit, and that volunteering with is so much more powerful in that relationship that you can build. And there was Tessa, I don't know if you saw this, or Tom, but there was a great article in Fast Company a couple of days ago from Benevity, sharing some recent data about how this community-centric model is just becoming more and more popular with employees, and how localized volunteering and building long-term relationships with nonprofits is just something that is really attractive to employees, especially for, I break volunteers into levels. There's like a level 1 employee volunteer who's really new to it, and a level 3 volunteer that's like, we actively volunteer in the community. Those level 3 volunteers want strong relationships, want to have it localized in their local community. And there's a lot of data supporting that right now. Okay, format stuff, Tessa. I think this will hit on a number of things here, including, like, there's that question, how are people supporting remote? I think what's crazy, and when Tessa and I get together, is like, we've been hanging out, Tessa, what 4 years now, like catching up and talking. And I think every time we connect, there's a new volunteer format. And I think it's been really exciting to see, like, just the evolution of volunteering and engagement in our space. And we'll talk about what we think that's going to also look like over the next few years. But employees are doing a lot of different things to reach their people. We have employees that are remote now, employees that are in office. We have employees that are in manufacturing, for example, that don't have access to a laptop and can't participate maybe in like virtual volunteer opportunities, or have trouble even logging into a CSR platform. And so we're seeing companies get really creative, and we can share some examples of that. But I think one thing that's been really interesting is a big boost in team-based and group-based volunteer activities. I think, early on when we were looking at CSR programs, we saw a lot of ETO, a lot of opportunities for individuals to take half a day, go volunteer in their local community. And a lot of our data was showing that there was a lack of adoption, a lack of people, actively going out and finding a nonprofit, finding a volunteer opportunity, and they just didn't really know how to get started. The team-based volunteering has been really exciting because I think of it as a point of activation. If we have 1,000 employees, for example, how do we activate them around a volunteer opportunity, and not just get them excited about volunteering, but also getting them excited about the social impact efforts that the company's taking really broadly. The team-based volunteering, we see a lot of companies taking that as an opportunity to connect with their people, educate them about the work that they're doing, broadly speaking, from social impact, and get them excited to volunteer. I think the other thing that's really exciting, and Tessa, I want your take on this too, because I know you talk a lot about this, micro actions. I think we think about like, how do we be inclusive of people? Not everybody has the opportunity maybe to take time out of their day and volunteer, or has the ability to physically go and volunteer. Micro actions is amazing because these are small actions in regards to just, how we can do something small. Maybe it's just, delivering food for an elderly woman in my neighborhood, for example, and tracking and measuring that. And that's been exciting because it's made volunteering and engaging in social impact efforts across the company more accessible, more attainable. And these little kind of breadcrumbs can do a lot. Tessa, do you want to talk about this at all? Because I know you do a great job talking about this.
Well, I think to add to what you said, Ben, that companies are more and more recognizing this as volunteering and community participation. It really happened during the pandemic, when we couldn't engage in traditional ways that we had, and people were having a very neighborly sense of just community. And I think that companies recognize that, and recognize that that is a part of how people participate in their communities. It's not only you're participating in this company sponsored event for volunteering, people do things outside of work, and that we could track this as well. So I'm excited to see companies recognizing that this is happening, this is important to people, and that they are including that in their tracking. I would love to hear too, based on this, you see the list we've got here. If you want to put in the Q&A, are there other ways that you are engaging employees, or that you've seen that you are excited about? So I'd love to look through those as well. And then I think the one other thing that I wanted to talk about here is, or actually kind of two things. In-person volunteering is the number one way that people want to engage now. Virtual and hybrid volunteering are here to stay also, because of the distributed workforce, and because even if teams are back in the office, some of them are spread out all over the country. So a team of 5 or 10 people, or even 500, could be in 10 cities, or even more across the country or across the world. So I think these hybrid and virtual opportunities really allow those teams to have that team-based experience. But in person is still the number one way that people are wanting to volunteer. People want to connect with each other. The other thing is, last on this list, is skills-based and pro bono volunteering. The research shows that if companies include skills-based and pro bono volunteering, they have higher engagement. People feel more connected, and even if it's not a large part of, it doesn't have to be every employee who's participating in this, but people feel real value in taking skills that they have, either in their work or skills outside of work. Maybe they're a great artist, but that's not part of their day-to-day job, and they get to contribute in that way. That feels really good to people, and those particular programs do boost engagement.
That's awesome. Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the skills-based piece. I think other formats that I think are really interesting. I talked a little bit at the beginning about how time is like this amazing resource that employees are becoming more and more reluctant and more protective over. And so when they see a half-day volunteer event, when they see a 2-hour volunteer event even, we have found that it could be really challenging to get employees to register and sign up for that. We've seen kind of a big boost in what we call self-guided volunteer experiences. To give you an example of this, think about it as like a master class for volunteering. An employee on their way out the door in their lobby might pick up a water filter build, right, and take it home with them. They'll scan a QR code and they'll watch like a whole series of videos about the cause with their family. And then their family will put together this water filter and then bring it back to the office where it will then be delivered to the nonprofit. So we're seeing like more flexibility in the way that people can volunteer with their time. And I think we'll see a lot more of that. And I think we're seeing a lot of people and a lot of companies want to say, hey, you can include your family, you can include your friends. And it's a way for employees to share the amazing social impact work that not only that they're doing, but that their company's doing. And so we're seeing a rise in that. And Tessa brought up a great point, like in person is the number one thing we're seeing right now, and the number one desire for employees and how they want to volunteer. Hybrid and virtual are going to stay. But to just put that in perspective, last year we worked with, I think, 300 companies, and we had 60 to 70% of the volunteering was still virtual or remote based. A lot of people volunteering from home. This year, 80% of the volunteer projects that we are working with companies on are in person. And so just a sense of like the shift that we're seeing and how big of a demand there is for the in-person side of things. Great, Tess, should we keep moving? How companies are finding
and one of the people in the Q&A said that let's see, their company provides gosh, sorry, I just lost it here. That they provide a list of in-home opportunities. So just to add to all the lists that you guys were talking about, and I'll keep letting you know about what we see in the Q&A here. Sorry to interrupt, keep going.
No, awesome. Thanks, Tom. And please, yeah, flag more questions for us.
Sure.
Tessa, I think maybe one thing is we could start big picture here, and where companies are finding success. And you and I were talking a little bit about this earlier this year, about employees rowing the same direction. Employee buy-in, I think, is really critical. What we find sometimes is that companies will set social impact agendas and corporate volunteer agendas that don't align with the interests and values of the employees. And so we find where companies find a lot of success is they are actively engaging their people early on, surveying them, understand what cause areas they're really passionate about, and aligning those cause areas that the employees are really passionate about with the cause areas that make a lot of sense for the business to support. And so an example of this is Atlassian. They're a software provider for a lot of project management software and development software, and they have employees all over the globe. What they did is they were kind of struggling at times to get engagement. They did an amazing survey of their people and understood the cause areas that they're really passionate about. And to give example, that climate was one of those areas that was really top of mind for a lot of employees. They pivoted a lot of their engagement and social impact strategies to focus on that. And rather than offering like 10 different cause areas that we're going to support, they really honed in on focused on 2 or 3 pillars related to climate that their employees could volunteer and rally around, and engagement numbers are through the roof. And I think it just shows an example of getting employee buy-in really early on and finding a lot of success. And I describe it as you can either push a boulder uphill and get people to participate, or guide a boulder downhill. And if you already know that your employees are really passionate about this, they're that much more likely to jump in and participate. I think one more thing I'll touch on here, and then Tessa, I'll bounce it back and forth to you, but I think we can talk a lot on this slide. There's a visual you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, and I call this like the employee engagement flywheel and finding volunteering at scale. This visual is how we're seeing a lot of companies find success and scale their volunteer programs. On the right, what we call a level 1 volunteer. We think about this as like the point of activation. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but for any new hires that are coming into the company, for any employees that have never volunteered before with the company, having a really curated volunteer experience for them, where maybe you're all doing the same thing, you're hosting a team event for them, and giving them a taste of what social impact at the company looks like and what volunteering at the company looks like, is really successful. Because what happens is that if we can activate employees successfully, they become what we call a level 2 volunteer. And this is a volunteer that is now actively engaging in volunteer programs that the company is hosting. Maybe it's an Earth Month campaign, Maybe it's a week of service that the company is hosting. Those employees are bought in and they've been activated in the right way, and they are actually interested in participating because they've had a really good experience. Where we've seen this work in a negative way is that employees will go and volunteer, or maybe do a volunteer event where they felt like it was busy work. They feel like they didn't make an impact, and you lose that volunteer. It's very challenging to get that employee volunteer to come back. So that activation is really important. And our ultimate goal is to get to what we call level 3 volunteer. And this is where an employee is having such a good time volunteering and participating that they're become an ambassador for the social impact side of the company. They are now hosting volunteer experiences across the company. Maybe it's across the company, maybe it's just for their team. They're advocating for people to get on these CSR platforms, log your volunteer hours, get donor dollars to these causes, and they meet regularly with the broader CSR organization. This is where we see companies start to find a massive amount of success because it starts scaling and spreading throughout the company. Atlassian, again, is a great example of this. They've really embraced this model, and they have ambassadors across their organization that are either leaders of ERGs or just team leads that are very passionate about volunteering for the business. And it's resulted in very high engagement rates. There's a number of other things I want to touch on here, Tessa, but I want to pass it to you because I just get excited and I just want you to be able to talk about some of these things as well.
Well, I think that last point you made too, Ben, about volunteer champions, community ambassadors, I think that's really what helps achieve scale, especially as we are engaging employees further in this work and with small CSR teams. I mean, having people who can help lead projects and having people who can be advocates outside of our team is really the way without hiring additional staff. A couple other things I wanted to touch on this slide is the first one. So since companies approach employee engagement differently, creating clear goals and measurement structures is critical. One thing, I kind of sometimes wish there was a one-size-fits-all approach, but I actually don't, because if there was, then we wouldn't see the innovation that we see, and it represents the diversity of the workforce, the way that companies approach this work differently. And it's really based on a lot of what you said, Ben, in terms of creating programs and offerings for employees that have the employee voice included in that, rather than saying, here's what we created for you, now participate. It's here's what we're creating together. We all want to do this as much as we can, through surveys and things like that are great resources, especially at larger companies. And I think too that some employees, and because of that, some employees many companies are moving toward a year-round model or have already done that. So they are offering either signature moments throughout the year, but programs are always available. So employees can participate in, sign up on the registration website at any time for any offering that's going on throughout the year. There's also those key moments during the year, like Earth Month or Season of Giving, that is it's Season of Giving in December, that would be times where they are pushing where CSR teams are pushing activation, but opportunities for volunteers are available all year round. Other companies are employing a large-scale one-time event. So maybe it's one time a year that there's a week or a month of service or a couple weeks, and that's really a time to engage a lot of volunteers. And some companies are moving toward that or moving away from that. And I think it really does depend on what employees want, where they're based, how they want to engage, and how much time they have. Also into this too is that the second to last on here is embedding volunteerism into existing company-wide or team experiences. I think that is really key. We're seeing more and more of teams reaching out and saying, hey, I have this offsite with my team. I want to include a volunteerism experience in it, or I want to, have some kind of community connection for the employees. And I think that is going to continue to rise, because it also reaches that desire for employees and managers in a lot of cases to build teams, and this really helps to build team success and make them feel more connected to each other. this is also, if there's anything to put in the Q&A, if you've seen anything else or piloted anything or thinking of piloting something or you're currently doing that's been successful, we would love to hear about it too. And I know this flywheel is a bit small on the slide. We'll be sending out these slides so you can and you can see the recording too, so you can look into it more there.
So I want to bring up one of the questions that came up around success. And this is a person who's done a lot of pro bono programs, apparently. And she wanted to ask about what you're seeing with regard to linking employee volunteering to aspects of the business beyond employee engagement, like talent development or R&D. And I'm just wondering, given that, there's still a lot of executives or a certain number of executives who think of volunteering as an add-on and not part of the business or not important, are you seeing more companies think about how this is really helping their business? And I saw a tech company years ago talk about how their volunteer programs actually ended up bringing product ideas back to the company. When they worked with a nonprofit, they came up with solutions that they then turned into marketable products. So what are you guys seeing in that space?
Tessa, I can give us some examples, but I know you want to start first because you have some great thoughts here.
Well, I have two thoughts. The first is building on what you just said, Tom. I think that is a great example. I think having a pro bono project that benefits the company is a real cool way to do it. I've also heard talk of people doing this for their, and actually I've seen it in a couple cases where companies or CSR teams particularly are engaging pro bono volunteers to help something for the team. So an example would be a couple volunteers are have skills in Excel and processes and program management or project management, and they help develop a new process and resources for a CSR team to roll out a new employee choice giving program that they wanted to do. And that was developed by employees. So I think targeting particular teams for something specific in that type of example can be really cool. And I think the other thing too that I've seen, which is really exciting, is designations within Workday or whatever system you have for employee kind of white pages, is to acknowledge in there, I'm a volunteer champion, right? Or have a little logo or a little tag on somebody's profile within a company-wide, I don't know what else to call it, white pages, I guess, where you look people up and you see a little logo on there that says, I'm a volunteer champion, or I'm an ERG leader. And I think that is a really cool way also to show that the community or the company is bought in, and it also helps people understand what those roles mean a little bit more.
Related to, as an example, to how companies can use it to just create other benefits for the business as well. An example I love using is Meta has a large learning and development team that's focused on empowering teams and getting them educated and doing that kind of L&D that we see in a lot of big companies. They do it through volunteering, though, in a lot of cases, which is really interesting. They've basically gone, volunteering is in a way one of the ultimate form of team building. We have people rallying around a common cause and solving a problem and coming together to do that. And what they have a lot of their learning and development teams do is build solar panels, for example, and they create challenges in regards to how teams work together and how teams can quickly put solar panels together. And they have a lot of breakouts and discussions of why this team moved faster than the other team. And they use it as a lot of case studies and training. And I think it's just one of many examples how companies are kind of using it as a way to create other benefits that fits throughout the business, which is really cool and exciting.
So you're seeing departments within these companies start to understand how to utilize employee volunteers to further some of their goals.
Yep.
And are there other departments besides R&D and talent development that you've seen any examples in?
Yes, I think you can see it in a lot of different areas. A company called Strong Tie, they do a lot of manufacturing, have warehouse workers, and how do you engage those people? And how do you train those people? And they do training exercises, and they'll actually do it through like a form of volunteering, right? And so, and they have volunteering throughout those training exercises. And so I think we can see companies, Tessa has a great point of embedding volunteerism into existing company-wide team experiences.
Yeah.
We're seeing companies start to do that because, again, employees have already blocked the time to do that. They're going to be participating. How do we invoke a little volunteering in there and accomplish our goals, but also have some volunteer aspects in there as well?
Right.
And I think that's been really interesting and where we're seeing companies find a lot of success. Strong Ties people, for example, never would volunteer. And now all of a sudden they are volunteering because it's been woven in to their agenda and what they do in their day-to-day when they're getting onboarded and trained. And I think that's been really interesting to see.
That's great. Okay.
I think that really quickly, Tessa, you said something on the companies utilizing year-round model, large-scale one-time events. Huge success there. I think some companies it works really well, some companies it doesn't. A call out of an example is Ancestry. They, again, were looking for a way to really engage their employees. They took a time of the year that they knew employees would already be looking to volunteer. So again, guiding that boulder downhill instead of pushing it up here. They took Earth Week and National Volunteer Week to do this, right? People were already looking to volunteer. It's kind of already on their agenda. They dedicated a full week of service then, and they have about 6 different opportunities throughout the day, every day that week. And so to make it really accessible for employees to find a time and an experience that works for them, that resonates with them. And that's been amazingly successful for them. And so, and doing it in a variety of formats, virtual opportunities, in-person opportunities, opportunities where we're shipping volunteer experiences to remote employees' homes. That's been really successful.
Okay, so we've got about 20 minutes left and we're getting a bunch of questions. So I'm wondering if you guys can go through these remaining slides pretty quickly and then we'll get to the questions.
Yeah, we can do this really quickly.
That'd be great.
Tessa, you want me to start here too? I think what gets us really excited about the future, a couple things. One, a lot of the feedback we get from thousands of employees is empathy. The experience lacked empathy. The experience lacked connection. I did this thing. I wasn't directly connected with the person that I was supporting, for example. We think immersive volunteering and using technologies like VR is going to make a massive difference. And so before an employee volunteer builds a water filter, for example, they are in a VR experience that actually shows the community they're impacting, what it's like to actually get water in that community, and how the filters are actively being used. I think that kind of immersion is going to be really powerful, not just for the volunteer experience, but how we continue to have volunteers support that cause afterwards. Again, we think of volunteering as a point of activation. The goal is that they can continue supporting the cause after they go through that experience. And that kind of immersive volunteering, I think, is going to be really, really powerful. I also think, there's just going to be a massive new wave of impact tracking and data capture. The Impact Genome is a project that I think is incredibly exciting right now. We used to just kind of track, number of volunteer hours, value of that volunteer time, number of participants, and it has expanded so far beyond that. We're able to track like number of people impacted by the water filters and the number of years of clean water it's going to deliver, and actually measure that data over thousands of employees. And I think that's just one example, but I think the impact tracking is going to be incredible. Tessa, I want to pass it to you so you could talk about a few of these as well.
So I think we've touched on some of these already in other slides. I think what I really want to talk about is the opportunities with the growth of AI is a big one. And then also, we haven't really talked about the further integration with diversity, equity, inclusion efforts and engaging the whole person as a volunteer. I really feel like that is how people want to, volunteering and community work is part of employees and part of people's lives. And people more and more are showing up to work and want to show up to work as their whole selves. So how can we work with employee resource groups and engage people in the way that they want to be engaged? And I really do feel like some of it starts with even just simple things that CSR teams and DEI teams can do together, even if it's like planning it, if there's an ERG summit or a quarterly meeting or something like that, and having a speaker from the community come to speak about or even the CSR team about the the benefits that are offered and how that might fit into what Employees Resource Group is already trying to do. So with AI, I think, well, I feel like I'm constantly behind. I really do try to keep up. I think it's evolving so quickly that I think we're all just learning as we're going. But a couple things I've seen that I'm excited about, I wanted to share. I think one of them that recently came out is the idea of using a model that can gauge what activities might resonate with employees at a specific company. So that could be really powerful. Rather than having to survey all your volunteers all the time, you could use AI to help determine that. I also think there's a potential for benchmarking across the field with compilation of data kind of behind the scenes, which is something that the field, I feel like, has been trying to do for so long. If there's a possibility to do some of that benchmarking and have companies be able to compare, for example, similar like companies with the impact that they're having on an easier way, I think that could be really powerful and move forward social movements. I also think, and this is kind of like I don't know, a more internal way, I do think that we can also, I am hopeful that there are possibilities to take some load off of social impact practitioners. I mean, to help even with simple kind of like parts of the day-to-day work that we do, like creating a starting point for a PowerPoint deck for leadership. I mean, I think some of those things are really close that we will be able to do soon, that hopefully will just advance the field overall.
One last example maybe on AI, because I know that's such a trending topic right now. I think we will see AI just be such an enabling technology to get more people to volunteer. So for example, on the CSR platform, I might allow that CSR platform to have access to my calendar. In my profile, I've noted I'm very passionate about planting trees and sustainability. That CSR platform will use the volunteer match database, identify volunteer opportunities in my area and go, hey, Ben, I noticed that you're free Friday at 4 o'clock. There's a tree planting event happening in Seattle where you're located. Would you like to participate? Serious. That is where it's going, folks. And I think it'll like be really exciting how that can engage more people to actually participate. So I think cool stuff to come in this space.
That's great.
Questions, Tom? Should we jump in there?
Yeah, we've got a bunch of them. So we've got about 15 minutes left. So yeah, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. Maybe if you could, keep it to a couple minutes, if that's possible on the response, that'd be great. But if you can't, that's fine too. One question we got, so it's a two-part question. I know some people have difficulty making the case to the leadership team about investing in volunteering and giving. So any thoughts on that? And then the related question that we got from the Q&A was, this person has trouble recruiting senior leaders because they're so busy. And obviously that makes a huge difference when a senior person shows up and volunteers. So any thoughts about that? And you can take that question from either side if you want.
Yeah, Tessa, I'm happy to give like a first pass at this.
Yeah.
And then jump in. Getting senior leadership buy-in can be really challenging, but also is a massive boost in programming. Back to my Atlassian example, they got leadership buy-in, their CEO shows up for volunteer events. It makes a huge difference, but that could be really challenging in a lot of companies. I think about, and what we help companies with is what we call campaigning. It might be really hard to get the executive team to participate. So we go as high up in the organization as we can. So maybe it's a VP of operations that we get to participate in volunteering. Maybe it's, a director of marketing in a division of the company. We do these campaigning efforts to get as high as we can and then utilize those connections to get higher in the organization. Sometimes this takes 3 months, sometimes it takes over a year, but that campaigning effort can really help us get more leadership buy-in as high as we can get in the organization. And so sometimes it starts with just one person, but it does take time, it does take effort. But we have found that to work really successfully, that campaigning effort, as we like to call it. Tessa, things you want to share here in your experience?
I think, especially for leaders, connecting this work to business value is resonates with them and you're speaking their language. So this may sound basic, but communications 101 is speaking to our audience. So making sure that we're really keeping in mind, once we do get in the room, of what matters to them. What are the priorities of the business right now? What are the values of the business overall, and connecting our work directly to those, which takes some work. But I think if you have 1 or 2 stats or like 3 bullet points that really outlines that for them, that really helps them see in a clear way why the value of your work is important, what it's adding to the company overall, and why they should participate in it, or why they should back it more than they are. The other thing I would say is that I would encourage every one of us to be prepared at any minute. If we meet somebody in the elevator, or if somebody, I mean, I've had executives text me or like message me. We always want to be prepared to give a 1 to 2 sentence description of why our work is important, why it's valuable, and what they can do. So just spending some time narrowing that down so you can do it in literally 20 or 30 seconds. So at any time, anybody who asks you, you'd be able to do that. I think that can really help as well.
Great. Got another interesting question. And I'm going to make this a 2-parter too. This person said, few companies have volunteering commitments expressed externally. Is this because volunteering is less of a focus? Or is it something that's becoming a bit of a hygiene factor when it comes to ESG commitments? Related, we talked about this earlier, given the political climate around ESG and the push around both positive and negative for ESG, as well as the sort of the anti-wokeness push by a lot of politicians. Are you seeing a pushback on people actually volunteering, as well as companies, to that first person's question, to that first question, companies talking less about volunteerism and employee engagement because of the political climate? So why don't we start with you, Tessa, on this one?
So there's like a few things I think that companies first staying the course of their programmings that they're doing, kind of like riding out the long-term investment game. You want to invest and then leave your money in there. Of course, changing and innovating as you go along. But I do think that the field is moving toward reporting on ESG more fully, and more CSR teams are including that as part of their work, or partnering with the teams who are doing that. I do also think that companies are focusing on internal ways that they can support employees and support communities, and a lot of those that doesn't have outwardly bold statements at this moment. So, for example, making sure that that employees are in trying to engage more employees as a goal, or connecting with employee resource groups, empowering and encouraging employee resource groups to do volunteer projects. Like that doesn't necessarily mean that they're making bold statements in the community or in press releases about what they're doing, but they are investing in it. And then the last thing I would say is that I also think, some of you may disagree with me on this, I do think that there is a place for companies to speak out on issues, but it needs to make sense for their brand and what they can do in the world. So if they speak out and lose a bunch of customers or take a risk that doesn't necessarily work out, that could be years of blowback where the business is struggling and they also are not doing any work in the community. So I think that choosing when to engage publicly is a smart way that companies are doing that, and it's employees do feel like companies need to be investing in these programs, but I think more employees are understanding that companies can't necessarily stand out on every issue.
Right. Okay. That's a good topic for a future webinar too. We could talk about this for a couple hours. Ben, what do you think?
I think just related to the big picture, to both those questions, Tom, there has definitely been a move towards what we're calling in the industry quiet giving. During the pandemic, there was definitely a massive push for companies to express their voices, especially around social justice issues. And you've seen that decline dramatically. And so quiet giving is something that's become really popular. 9 out of 10 in this recent article in Benevity survey, 9 out of 10 CSR leaders are being more internal about their efforts instead of external as they have been in the past. And there's a number of reasons for that. And so there is definitely a term being used in the industry called quiet giving. it's definitely a big internal focus. And so just kind of want to share that we've definitely noticed that trend as it relates to this.
Helpful. I had another question. Somebody was asking about how you re-engage employees that might have had a bad volunteer experience or something that was not very satisfying. So they're a little bit turned off. And again, I tend to do these two-part questions. For employees that just don't have time, can't volunteer, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you make them feel engaged. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but obviously there's always a pretty large percentage of people that just, they have 4 kids at home and a lot of other things they're working on, and they just can't volunteer. So they feel bad about that, or they feel like they're just not part of the corporate community that's going out there, and they may feel a little guilty about it. So I was wondering if you could tackle both of those questions. Ben, why don't we start with you?
I'm happy to and excited to talk about that first part. What do you do with an employee that had a bad experience, and how do you get them re-engaged? We see this all the time, and we see it especially when CSR leaders jump into a new company. We're working with CSR leader now, jumped into a pharmaceutical company, and these employees have had just terrible experiences and consistently shifting of goals and strategies, and there's just been no consistent pattern. And so where we've found success is, again, kind of to that point of weaving in volunteering to existing business events and practices. And so, for example, with their sales team, they have sales conferences all across the US. They're now doing a company branded volunteer experience during those sales conferences for 30 minutes to an hour. And we're seeing the positive results of they're expressing like, this is the new vision for social impact at our company. And this is what volunteering can be like. And we're seeing a big pickup in engagement as a result. People are having this aha, like, oh, this is actually making impact. Oh, I actually get what we're trying to do here. Like, oh, I'm interested in participating in the future. So again, it's going to be hard if you're just doing a standalone volunteer opportunity to get that employee to participate after getting burnt and having a bad experience. So again, interweaving it into existing business events and practices is a great way to get people reactivated around the cause.
Great.
I can take the second part, Tom, briefly, if you want.
Before we do that, Ben, can you put us back to the slide that says, where do we go from here? Somebody's asking if they could see that again. Sorry to interrupt, Tessa, but.
Yeah, great. So I think in terms of how to engage employees who are unable to volunteer or feel like they can't volunteer or have too many things going on, I think this comes down to offering a variety of ways to engage. So really meeting them where they are, setting up a booth maybe in the lunchroom that, with a micro volunteering opportunity, in addition to all the other offerings we have. Maybe these people would be interested in learning opportunities or giving to a cause they care about, which also boosts engagement. And I also think that continuing to offer the benefits like matching gifts and offering volunteer opportunities to the whole company, even though everyone won't be able to participate, every employee will see those, that the company is doing this. So while they're not volunteering necessarily, they could feel pride that their company is investing in this, glad that their company is offering it, more likely to stay because they continue to see this and they know the company is doing this work. It's difficult to measure that, but I have seen statistics that point just to that just the fact that these programs are offered helps engagement scores go up. And I've got to say, Tom, I know we only have 4 minutes, happy to answer as many as we can here, but I'm also happy, Ben, I won't speak for you, but we can just answer questions afterward too and send them out.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was thinking about. We can go through the Q&A and send it to all the participants with your thoughts on those questions. Why don't we take the last couple minutes and give you guys a chance to talk about anything that you think we've missed, or top of mind issues that you think would be valuable for the participants. So give you a chance to just sort of wrap it up. And I'll let you decide who wants to go first.
Bessie, want to take a first pass?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this, and it's mainly around as a CSR professional, possibly with limited resources, leading a small team, or maybe a team of 1 or 2 or half. How do we approach this work this year, right? And in the next year in the environment that we're in? I think that a few things here point to this is The second one, picking a couple things. So I wanna make sure that we don't overwhelm ourselves with trying to do everything. We can do one or two things to research and to pilot and to try out, maybe even with a small group, and then point to the success of that. I'm a huge fan of piloting because of that. I really do feel like it allows a little test grounds, experimental grounds, without putting in too much effort and without making it big and loud. And then on the last one here, I think that we can all, people who are attracted to this work are creative and innovative. And I think that we can all spend just a few minutes thinking about things that might improve our programming that don't necessarily cost additional money or need additional staff. Some of these do take time, but can we have an additional conversation with a community partner that we really want to double down with, that maybe they offer pro bono opportunities, or they have a pro bono project that we haven't thought about yet, and maybe that's the way that we pilot with a long-term partner that we already have. So building on those relationships and programs that we've already built. And then there's a couple other examples here, but I also just want to cheer us all on and share that we're all in this together, and we're all trying to figure out a lot of these things together. And I have loved this discussion and can't wait to see the rest of your questions, and love the engagement, and think that we're all figuring it out and we all have great ideas.
That's great. Thanks, Tessa. Ben, any final thoughts?
I'm so glad Tessa went first, because that was just so beautifully summed up and wrapped up. And to Tessa's point, it has been a really challenging year for a lot of CSR professionals. And so don't be afraid to reach out and get support and get help. I think, not to speak for Tessa, but just knowing Tessa, like, we both are willing to jump on the phone and talk through these challenges with anybody. Like, we're here to help. We have worked with a lot of different companies, and we can, we've seen what works and what doesn't work, and we'd love to be able to support. Every company's goals are different. Every company's challenges are different. And so as much as Tessa and I highlight a lot of these points, it's not a one size fits all approach. And so we're cheering you on. Tessa brought up great points on the long-term relationships that we can build with nonprofits. That's incredibly effective. For companies that are budget strapped, really leaning into micro actions, really leaning into skills-based and pro bono. There are things that you can still do to empower your employees to make a lot of impact. And we're happy to support and cheer you on in those things. So thank you for taking the time and listening to Tessa, Tom, and I talk. Like, this is a lot of fun for us. And so we appreciate you jumping on and listening to us too.
The final comment I got, Ben, was, is Ben really located in Seattle?
No, I'm in Bend, Oregon, but so just theoretical Ben's there. Yeah.
Well, one last question we got is, can we get a copy of the recording? And that's a good final point I wanted to make. This webinar will be posted on our website in a couple days, and we will also do an executive summary for those of you who want to read a summary of the webinar and don't have an hour to go through or to listen to the whole thing. But thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, especially Tessa and Ben. That was fantastic. We will get you back, and because this is a topic that we could spend many more hours on, and I'm sure people would love to hear even more. We will ask Ben and Tessa to respond to the questions. We'll send that out to all the participants. And if anybody has any other questions or thoughts, please let me know. And hopefully you will all join us again on July 18th at 12 o'clock for our next webinar on the, I can't remember the exact title, but it's about the fashion industry, past, present, and future. And it should be fascinating. So thanks again, everybody. Take care, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.